In September of 1942, there was a flood that impacted the low-lying areas of Pierce County, Wisconsin. The village of Spring Valley would experience catastrophic flooding overnight. While searching for articles relating to Pierce County on newspapers.com, I found a detailed account of this flood published in the Marshfield News Herald by Dr. James S. Vedder. Dr. Vedder was in town getting his wife and young son settled in with her parents, the Grassleys, while he headed off to serve in the U.S. Navy Medical Corps during World War II. He would serve at the Battle of Iwo Jima and write a book about his experiences. Pictured here is the first half of a display I created to commemorate the 80th anniversary of this flood for Spring Valley's Dam Days in 2022. Dr. Vedder's account would cover 3 days. Here are the first 2. Here are the events occurring from midnight and going through to the next day when the town was able to come out of their homes and businesses to view the devastation the floodwaters left behind. There will be future opportunities to view the entire timeline. In this video, I will be sharing excerpts from Dr. Vedder's detailed account while showing a slideshow of photos illustrating the devastation. The timeline begins at 11:50 a.m. on Wednesday, September 16, 1942. Lieutenant and Mrs. Vedder arrived at Spring Valley at 11:50 a.m. last Wednesday, the day before the flood which virtually ruined the little town. They had gone to visit Mrs. Vedder's parents, Mr. and Mrs. J.L. Grassley, with whom Mrs. Vedder and their son, James III, will remain for the duration. Pictured here is the home of the Grassleys. This is the vantage point Dr. Vedder had while he documented this timeline of events. It's located on Upper Glade Avenue. The timeline on Wednesday continues at 4 p.m. Ominous black clouds had begun to gather in the northwest. 4:30 p.m. About 4:30 they closed in with a high wind. The rain here was slight, but at Woodville, on the headwaters of the O'Galley, a cloudburst broke. They had 4.5 inches of rain in 29 minutes. Fortunately, for our peace of mind, we were uninformed of the event. 6 p.m. The skies cleared at 6 p.m. and we watched a beautiful sunset. Wednesday evening, the water only came up 4 feet in the streets. The floodgates were intact on the buildings and no damage was done. Everyone was watching it, and they were in a carnival mood, for Friday was to be Farmer's Day. The timeline continues on Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Dr. Vedder writes, "Drove down to Elmwood. The river was full from bank to bank. 1 more foot of rise and it would leave its banks. The rain assumed downpour proportions, so we scurried the 8 miles back to Spring Valley and got the car back up on the hill. However, no flood came then." Thursday, 3:50 p.m. Thursday dawned dark and drizzly. Fine rain all day. Went down to the bank with Lorraine and had my papers placed in a safety deposit vault. Jokingly, I told Mr. Grassley to see that my valuables were to be kept above flood level. 6:30 p.m. The rain assumed cloudburst proportions. I looked down in the valley. No water on the streets yet. 7:45 p.m. The flood siren sounded. News by telephone that they had 4 inches of rain again at Woodville. This water would be down to Spring Valley in about 2.5 hours. 8 p.m. Rain had stopped. Went down into valley. Much activity by merchants. More worried than last night because the rain was going to send 3 creeks into flood too, and their crest would reach the town at the same time the water came down the O Galley from Woodville. 8:35 p.m. Watched Mines Creek for 15 minutes, and in that time, it had risen 3 feet. 8:40 p.m. Headed back through town to safety of the hill, had to wade through foot-deep water to reach the hillside. 8:55 p.m. Water has risen 2 feet, valley now under 3 feet of water. 9 p.m. Storm broke with renewed fury. It was the heaviest rain I'd ever seen, so I can say it was a cloudburst without exaggerating. It was all we could do to reach shelter. Then we drank coffee and waited for the storm to subside. 9:55 p.m. The lights went out. Water had to be over 12-foot mark to down the transformers. The downpour had just begun to slacken. 10:07 p.m. Reached flood level, and the most nerve-shaking sight I have ever seen met my eyes. The valley was filled with water from hill to hill. Only the second floors of buildings were visible. The water was between 17 and 18 feet deep in Main Street. Above the roar of the river could be heard the cries for help from trapped people and the crashing and creaking of the groaning of the despairing buildings. We certainly had ringside seats to a horrible show. The lighting was uncertain from flashes of lightning, but quite steady from the flash of torches carried by some of the other spectators. It gave one the willies to think that there were 600 to 700 people in that deluge. 10:09 p.m. The first casualty was a building, Nelson and Wolf's 2-story warehouse. It spun around and struck Nelson's store on Main Street with a mighty blow. Then the fast, disintegrating warehouse bounced back toward the hillside. On its course, it clipped off 2 telephone poles as if they were toothpicks. The current caught it again and sent it crashing into the feed mill across the street, knocking that building slightly askew too. 10:14 p.m. Just as the warehouse came to rest, I noticed my feet were wet. I looked down and saw water running over the tops of my shoes, and I was standing about 4 feet out in the river. At 10:09, I was on dry land, and I hadn't moved in the past 5 minutes. The water had raised that fast. I would not have believed it had it not been my feet that got wet. 10:16 p.m. Arnesons had escaped drowning and were on the roof of their store. They had managed to chop a hole in the ceiling and crawl out of the roof. They had only 14 inches left between the water and the ceiling at the time of their escape. 10:22 p.m. The first house went by, was spinning like a top. Folks thought it was empty. 10:32 p.m. The water has risen several more feet. Turned out to be the crest of the flood. The Bartlesons were safe on an adjoining roof. It was feared they were lost when the north wall of the drugstore collapsed. But they also managed to chop a hole in the roof. The water was soon over 20 feet deep in Main Street. 10:42 p.m. The widow Larson's house came whirling into view, and it was gone in a flash. She was in the upstairs, hanging on for dear life. Fortunately, the house was trapped by a weeping willow tree. 11 p.m. The flood had receded 6 inches. The cries of the people, the howling dogs, and the bleating of the sheep were getting on our nerves. As it was Farmer's Day on the morrow, much livestock had been quartered in the local garages. 11:30 p.m. Went back to flood. Water down a foot. Too depressing to watch. Went up to Grassley's home. Phyllis Anderson was hysterical. She had been staying with Mrs. Grassley during the flood and had just seen her home go down the creek. Friday, 1 a.m. Several more houses are gone. Knott's store is missing. The water is down about 4 feet. Will be daybreak before the water is off the streets. 2 a.m. Have been in the bed an hour. Can't sleep. The calls of the people and the roar of the river is not conducive to a peaceful state of mind. 4:30 a.m. The widow Larson was rescued. 6:15 a.m. It is a cold gray dawn. An overcast sky adds to the desolation. Mr. Grassley and I are down in the valley surveying the damage. The village folk were walking about aimlessly in a punch-drunk fashion. They had been checking up for almost an hour and no missing people or injured were found. From all the tales I've heard about the near escapes from death, I think it's miraculous that there was no loss of life. The casualties were confined to livestock and dogs. Even 2 sheep were saved. They were bleeding piteously from the top of a 2nd-story building. No one knew how they arrived up there. "6:30 a.m. The first Red Cross unit arrived. 7 a.m. This was the 6th and worst flood of the year. They were busy at work digging out mud and trying to salvage what was left. There were a goodly number that were wiped out clean. Nothing left but the soaked clothes they still had on. 7:30 a.m. The Red Cross unit had set up in business in the Congregational Church and were serving the people breakfast. They've been feeding the whole town 3 square meals a day ever since. I'll never stint on my Red Cross donations again. 8 a.m. Back up on the hill. No water, no electricity for cooking, no plumbing, and no flood water, thank heaven. I have the job of being water boy. Have to lug it up from Red Cross headquarters. Also, I'm errand boy. Got bread and butter from Red Cross. Felt foolish when they wouldn't let me pay for it. When I left town a few days ago, who'd have thought I'd be accepting charity today? 11 a.m. The town is being overrun by curiosity seekers. Some of them are doing a fair share of looting. The Home Guard is going to be sent from Eau Claire. 1:30 p.m. Went down with Mr. Grassley to help him break into the bank. Finally managed to force open the back door. What a mess. Half a dozen bulls in a china shop couldn't have done a better job. Helter-skelter everything. Papers, books, adding machines, typewriters, etc., all nicely covered with about 1/2 to 1 inch of nice, sticky, oozy sludge. We cleared things out from the vault and looked in. Oh yes, water was in there too. My insurance papers, etc., were nicely soaked. 5 p.m. Found the depot agent trying to repair his telegraph. My tickets were to be there today. He told me what I expected. No tickets would come. As a result, I'm leaving on Tuesday. They expect to have water and lights by Sunday, so Jimmy the Third and Lorraine will be okay. That concludes Dr. Vedder's timeline of the 1942 flood in September. Again, that was an abridged version, and the full version can be viewed at our display, either at our office or at future Dam Days events.